It is Thursday, February 27th, 2020, and welcome back to the Derek Diamond Experience Podcast, episode 248 to be exact. This upcoming week is Pensacon, and it feels crazy that it's finally here. I always feel like it kind of sneaks up on me personally, but joining me for the opening segment for today's show is the co-writer of the film Monsters Anonymous and my co-host on the Nerd Cave Retro podcast. Welcoming back Mr. Jason Robbins. How are you, my friend?
I am great. What does this make? Like number 30?
Close to it. It's got to be 27 or 28, I think. So
yeah, it's getting up there.
Getting a little bit closer to that record. So I don't know if I speak for you, but as I mentioned a second ago, I feel like Pensacon, because when people hear this the day it comes out, it's going to be the day before the convention. I always feel like Pensacon sneaks up on me every single year.
It kind of does. It's weird. Like, it always feels like it's so far away, but then once the beginning of the year hits, then it feels like it sneaks up on you. It always feels like it's so far away, and then once the turn of the year, like January 1st, all of a sudden it feels like all of a sudden it's Pensacon.
Well, I think part of it is that we spend the holidays, getting gifts for people, wrapping up the year, all that kind of stuff. So you're not really thinking about it. So then when January hits, it's like, oh crap, it's like practically here.
Yeah, because I didn't even book my hotel till about 3 weeks ago. I was like, oh no, I need to do that.
Well, no, and it all worked out, and we'll get into our panels at the end of the conversation because you and I are going to be quite busy during the weekend.
Yes, we are. I think between the two of us, we have like 10, 11 panels, something like that.
Close to it. It's got to be right around 10, maybe a little bit less. But so the reason why I'd ask you to come on the podcast is because I got to interview Cindy Morgan, who's going to be at Pensacon, and she was also the star of Caddyshack as well as Tron. And yes. I know you're a fan of the Tron film, and plus there's going to be a big Tron reunion actually at Pensacon. They're going to do a Q&A, and then they're actually going to show the film after the Q&A is over, which I think is a really cool thing because we're coming up on the 40-year anniversary of Tron, which is crazy to think about.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy to think about that was, you look back on the I know we're going to get into this, but you look back on the special effects of that movie and the very, very early CGI that was used in that movie, and it still holds up crazy well to this day.
Well, and I was watching it on Disney Plus the other day, and it's fully remastered and everything, and the effects actually still hold up, I think, fairly well because it has a very distinct look than any other films that have that type of setting where it takes place primarily in a digital realm.
Yeah.
And the way they did it, because I was reading up on it, the fact that they, in a way, had to invent new technologies in order to do that, to pull that off. You think about it today with the great special effects we have, in some fully animated CG movies and some a hybrid of live action and CG, but to do it almost 40 years ago was practically unheard of.
And that's the crazy thing too, is how did they talk Disney into doing this movie? Because it was such a radical concept, and it was kind of in that era of Disney, the early 80s, late 70s or early to mid 80s, where Disney really didn't have a whole lot going on, and I guess they were kind of in an experimental stage because their cartoon movies really weren't doing that well. They weren't really doing anything spectacular. This was around the time of like the Black Cauldron and all that kind of stuff. They were kind of losing money with Disney World and all that. So Disney wasn't in the greatest place when this movie came out, and it still was not exactly a box office success. Like it didn't gain success until, the VHS market came around.
The film, when it came out, didn't do that great at the box office, but the video game that was based on it actually made more money than the movie.
Well, I still remember the video game being at the local skating rink when I was a kid, and it was always the one machine that kind of called to me every time I went in there because I loved the movie as a kid. I was one of the few kids I knew that actually liked that movie. I had it on VHS that I think my grandfather had taped it off of HBO for me. And then as I got older, I actually bought the VHS. Then I bought the DVD. I still have them with me. I think the DVD actually goes for a pretty good price. I think it was the 20th anniversary DVD with all the special features and everything on it. I still have it. And I even liked the sequel that came out in 2010. A lot of people didn't like that one either, but and it was kind of weird because it was still in that early sort of where they de-aged Jeff Bridges for it.
Hmm.
But in my mind, it still kind of worked because you're in a digital realm and it's supposed to have that sort of surreal quality to it.
Well, I think specifically with the Clue character in Tron Legacy, the fact that he's essentially a CG copy of Jeff Bridges, the look
Yeah.
actually works. And you could, I was watching Tron Legacy as well, and it's crazy how far de aging has coming. Because, like you said, that movie came out in 2010, 10 years
Yeah.
ago. And we look at, I'll use Terminator Dark Fate as an example. The fact that they de aged Linda Hamilton and Arnold the way they did, it
Hmm.
looked near flawless.
Yeah.
But it didn't really take me out of the movie because when you see like the young Kevin Flynn, it's just like a very brief time. It's
Yeah,
just for little
exactly.
snippets, like at the very beginning of the movie, and then you have a couple of flashbacks. But I didn't think it looked all that bad.
I just love the world of Tron. Like Tron 3 has been in the works for a while now, and I really hope that it gets, I hope it gets made because I don't know if you ever saw Tron Uprising, the cartoon. It's
I did
actually
not.
on Disney Plus now. I
Hmm.
highly recommend it. It's very, very well done. It only lasted like one season, I think, but it had Elijah Wood did one of the voices in it. And but yeah, go check that out on Disney Plus. It's really, really good.
Kind of going back to the original Tron, I actually didn't see it until after I saw Tron Legacy. Because I saw Legacy in theaters the weekend it came out because the concept of Tron had always intrigued me,
Mm.
but I had heard very mixed things about the original movie, so I never really sat down and watched it. But
Well, it's definitely sort of it's an I wouldn't say it's an acquired taste, but it's definitely a movie for people like us who love video games. I don't think that people who aren't into like computers and video games and things like that, I just don't think they really get it.
yeah, I would agree with that. But I knew like the basis of what the story was about. Like I knew the very basic details of it going into Tron Legacy, and then I actually loved the Legacy movie. The effects were great. I thought using Daft Punk to do the score was the perfect marriage.
Oh my God, still one of the best scores of all time. I actually have that score in my iTunes library. I still listen to it regularly.
Hmm. Yeah, I got it on because I went through a phase where I was collecting records, and I found the Legacy soundtrack on vinyl and got it.
Oh wow, I would love to have that on vinyl.
Yeah, and it sounds really good too. So, transitioning back to the original movie, you said you watched it as a kid. What can you remember your initial thoughts of watching the movie for the first time?
I was so young, I don't really remember the first time I watched it. It was one of those movies that, like, my grandfather had HBO from like in the late 70s, early 80s, I think. So he would tape a bunch of movies for me. Like, I had the original Star Wars trilogy on VHS, I had Tron, I had anything that I still love to this day, like the Goonies. I had the Black Hole, Disney's The Black Hole on VHS. Like I had all these great movies on VHS that my grandfather would tape for me, and one of them was Tron. And I just remember watching it all the time because I just loved it. The thing that got me the most was the light cycles. I wanted a light cycle so badly when I was a kid. I still do as an adult. Like if I had the chance to like that that's something I don't understand why they haven't done in VR yet is a light cycle game. Like that's just tailor made for VR.
Yeah, you would think. I know one cool thing that they're doing at Disney World is they're building a Tron roller coaster, and you're going to be on a light cycle.
Oh, that's awesome.
As like when that opens, I have to go do it. It's just going to
Oh
be
yeah.
because I remember reading when Legacy came out, they altered a section of Disneyland to look like the Tron world, and they even had Flynn's arcade.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Like that was something I loved about the original Tron, and I know it's a very minor part of the movie, but I loved seeing the full arcade, like with everyone at the different cabinets, and the Flynn character just kicking ass on was it Space Paranoids?
Yes.
And just the what's crazy is that I wanted one of those shirts that just said Flynn's on the back of it. I haven't gotten one yet.
Oh yeah.
But there's just something about that simple like neon text that I love. But it's the arcade
It's
scenes.
very iconic, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Because I remember when Legacy came out, people loving the scene when Flynn's son goes into the arcade and turns it on, and all the machines come to life. The jukebox comes on and it's playing Journey. It was just like a time warp back to the 80s.
Yeah. And also, I wanted to mention if people listening to this like are as big of Tron fans as we are, there was a game that came out on the original X back in 2003, 2004, and it's called Tron 2.0, and it has a really good. It's sort of like Halo, like that first person shooter Halo vibe to it, and it had light cycle races on it too. So,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
it's available on Steam now, and I haven't picked it up yet, but I'm very tempted to pick it up because I used to have it for the original Xbox, but now I was looking it up and I found that it says it's on Steam for $9.99.
Now that you mention it, I remember hearing about that game. And I never played it because I remember just thinking, oh, that's just based off the old Disney movie.
Yeah,
Because it in a way, it's still kind of like one of those Disney movies that nobody ever talks about. And the crazy thing is, and another thing that I was reading about, is that a lot of Disney animators didn't want to work on the movie because they thought that computers would put them out of business.
yeah,
But I mean, you look, all these years later, how essential computers are. So,
yeah. No, I mean, without Tron, probably would have never had. We never would have had Pixar.
yeah, you're probably right. Well, and the crazy thing is in a way it was kind of telling the future of humanity because of how dependent we are on computers, and that they weren't nearly close to being invented at the time, but cell phones and how dependent we are with technology. You kind of get a little bit of a glimpse of that in the original Tron movie.
Yeah. Well, that's the cool thing. Like the whole plot of Legacy was Clue trying to, because basically the Tron universe is a closed system.
Hmm.
It doesn't exist outside of Flynn's arcade or whatever. So the whole plot of the movie was Clue trying to basically get out through the internet. So that would be an interesting story to go into for Tron 3 if people could actually go into what the internet would look like from the Tron world point of view.
Well, and also I remember seeing some deleted scenes on the Legacy DVD that in a way sets up a third film. And they leave it
Yeah,
open at the end of the second movie. But there's a scene early on in Legacy that has Dillinger's son. Dillinger in the original movie was played by David Warner. His
yeah,
son is a huge part of Incom. But there's a scene on the Blu-ray that's Dillinger's son and Dillinger talking with each other. It could be like they could be a part of a third movie. I mean, I think that would be kind of a cool callback to the original if they did that.
Yeah. And another thing, does David Warner age at all?
No, he'll outlive all
Because
of us.
I was watching In the Mouth of Madness last night, which is a really good John Carpenter movie from 1996. And Tron was made in 81. He looks exactly the same in the Mouth of Madness that he did in Tron. And then I look up a picture of him on IMDb, and he still doesn't look any older. Like he still looks the same age as he did back in Tron. That was 40 years ago. Like, is this dude a vampire?
I'm convinced two people that are going to outlive everyone on this earth: David Warner and Ric Flair.
Yeah, and yeah, I think so.
But another cool thing about the original movie, it says here
And
on the
Keith Richards too. Sorry, I was just thinking. I was like, yeah, Keith Richards is going to be the just going to be the three of those guys sitting around at the end of time.
in all seriousness, I could see Keith Richards living to be, because how old is he now, or how old do you think he's
Oh,
got to be now?
he's got to be in his mid 70s at least.
I'm gonna predict he lives to be 115.
Oh, easily. And he just quit smoking like
Yeah,
two
so
weeks ago.
he's absolutely gonna live until then.
I was like, oh, now he's going to live forever.
Something else that I wanted to bring up here on the DVD commentary, it says there's almost no camera movement, and I'm thinking about this, from having a fresh perspective on the movie. There's almost no camera movement whatsoever in any of the shots of the electronic world with the live action characters, and I imagine it's probably because the effects were so delicate at the time that
Yeah.
they couldn't deal with a lot of constant moving around.
Well, not only that, but the way the movie was shot, they had those. If you look at their costumes, like in the light, they look so stupid.
Yeah.
But you look at them with it because it was made with that reflective material. So the only way that really works is, they have to be, the light has to be at a certain angle. The camera has to be in a certain spot to be able to catch the light off of that material. So I can see why there was really no camera movement, because once you kind of get the lighting and the camera and spot in the spot it needs to be, then you really don't have, you don't have much movement there.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really take away from the movie, in my opinion, because there aren't a lot of complex camera movements anyway when it comes to
Yeah.
movies from that era. And going off of that, because you grew up with these type of movies, so you could probably have a better answer than I do. Because I was actually chatting about this with Cindy Morgan. Why do you think movies from like the late 70s to mid 80s, like Tron, Caddyshack, I'd throw in Ferris Bueller, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, all those movies have that very unique charm that no other movie from any other era has, in my opinion. Why do you think that's the case?
I think people were allowed to, I think movie companies at the time were allowed to be a little more experimental, because even at the time that Ghostbusters was being made, that was around the time that big companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, those kind of companies were starting to buy up movie companies. So you don't have the original system in place for the studios, where the studios were owned by like one guy or like a couple of people making the decision. So there was no kind of committee that you had to go through. You just basically, you pitched the movie to your representative, and the representative would go to the head of the movie studio, and they would either red light it or green light it, and then you went off and made your movie. And of course, you probably got a few notes here and there from executives, but you don't have that huge corporate overlord that are penny pinching everything and have to have a say so and everything. So I think movies were allowed to breathe a little bit more and be a little more experimental. I don't think you're going to get that anymore. I mean, you do with, I think, smaller companies like Bloomhouse is kind of doing that, but at the same time, they're also penny pinching as well. So yeah, their directors have to be a little more creative with some of the effects and stuff that they want to do. But I think that's where the charm of those movies come in as well. I think when you're given free reign and you don't have as much money as you would if you were kowtowing to corporate overlords, I think things just tend to come out a little better and a little more timeless.
Well, and you think of these stories, and it's tough to say what's true or not true because there's so much fake news and fake articles that are out there. So it's tough to differentiate fact from fiction. But you hear these stories about current movies, like the Star Wars movies, for example. They seem to be very micromanaged.
Yeah.
Especially with these newer movies, and then even with the MCU, looking at the Kevin Feige's plan from Iron Man to Avengers Endgame didn't really change all that much
Yeah.
from what the initial concept. So it's in a way, it's like, how much freedom do you really have to make
But look
something
at
in that universe?
but look at what happens when someone does get a little bit of freedom to do what they want to do. Like you look at Jon Favreau and The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty much a singular vision that he had, and he was pretty much left alone to do it. And when they tried to come in and tell him what to do, he was like, no, I'm going to do it this way. And he's got the power to do that. So I think that's why we love The Mandalorian so much, is because it's not a movie or a TV show made by committee.
Well, and it's not tied down to anything either. Like The
Yeah.
Mandalorian is very much the reason why I like it, or one of the big reasons why I like it, is that it's this small, intimate story that it takes place in this huge universe with other characters and other things going on, but you're only concerned about a guy in Mandalorian armor and little baby Yoda,
Yeah.
and that's it.
And you look back at the movies like that have stood the test of time, like The Goonies and Ghostbusters and Tron, like those movies in that era, they weren't trying to make a movie to be a franchise. Like they didn't have franchises in mind. They just had this one story that they wanted to tell. And if it worked, great. If not, no harm, no foul. But I think most movies that are made now are made and with franchises in mind. And I don't think you can really do that. Just tell a nice, tight, concise story and
Mm-hmm.
see what happens and go from there. But don't go into it thinking, oh, this is going to make a great franchise. Just tell a good, concise story that has a nice, tight ending on it. And if you can add on to it, then great.
Yeah, that seems to be a big problem with movies today, is everything. I think the MCU kind of set an unfair precedent when it comes to
Yeah.
modern movies, that everyone wants the next big franchise.
But that's the world that those movies come from, though, as well. Like the comic book world, like the comic books are built on serializing these stories and continuing these stories and keeping them going for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. I mean, they've been telling the same stories over and over again, and that's what they do. That's the comic book world. So I feel like those movies are set apart from anything else because that's what they're supposed to be, like serialized stories.
True. No, that's a good point.
But like you said, it's also set an unfair precedent because those movies like that, of course, the Star Wars movies kind of started this as well. Like everybody wants a franchise, and not everything needs to be a franchise.
No, there have been some of the greatest movies of all time are one and done movies.
Yeah.
But that's the great thing about movies, is that I don't go into every movie thinking, oh, I'd love to see what happens, or like I have to see what happens afterwards, because part of the fun discussion is after you watch a movie, sitting around with your friends and thinking, oh, I'd love to see what happens
Oh,
after
yeah.
that, but at the same time it's like you don't necessarily have to.
Like one of my favorite directors of all time is John Carpenter. And you look at John Carpenter movies like They Live and In the Mouth of Madness and
Big Trouble in
The
Little China.
Thing. Yeah, Big Trouble in Little China. Like those are great one-off movies that there's something to be said for leave them wanting more. And I think that's what works in those movies' favor, is like we never got a sequel to They Live that didn't live up to the original and kind of tarnished it. We never got a Big Trouble in Little China sequel that tarnished the original. These are great cult hit movies that are just really good one-offs.
Well, I think that's why I was surprised that Legacy came out, many years later after the original Tron movie, because my thought was, why are you going back now
Yeah.
and revisiting it? But I think Legacy is a bit of an exception to that rule because I
But
actually loved what they did with it.
yeah, it had a cool story, and it kind of makes sense to, have Flynn disappears to go back into that world, and his son has to find out what happens to him, and he gets sucked into that world and tries to find a way out. Like, it works on that level, and that's why I don't understand why it didn't really catch on and kind of failed. It's such a good story and such good movies. I don't know. I don't know. I guess people just aren't into it. They think it's too weird or something.
It might be a little too out there for some people. I mean, I don't think it is personally because I've watched movies that are way more outlandish than Tron.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. So as we start to wrap up here, what to you is the legacy of the original Tron? We'll leave Legacy out of the conversation, but if we're talking strictly about the original Tron film, what do you think is the legacy of that movie these years later?
Oh, definitely CGI as far as movies go. I mean, it was the first movie that really had CGI in it. And that just blows my mind that they were doing that with those computers at that time. Because, they were building this world that they couldn't even see what they were doing. They were basically building it in code.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool camera tricks that they had to do, the story. And I think it's one of the more, probably the most creative movie that the Disney company has ever done. Like, as far as taking a strange concept and just going with it and allowing it to be made, even though, like I said, it failed miserably at the box office. But I think it inspired so many people afterwards. Like, it's just one of those great cult classic movies. And I think if you talk to a lot of people that are in the movie industry, like especially, computer animators and stuff, I guarantee you that movie was one of their original inspirations to go into that field.
I think it's going to be one of those movies that will never quite get the credit that it deserves.
No, I don't think so. But I think with among the people that do love it, like, we will always like fly the Tron flag,
Mm-hmm.
even though most people don't get it. It's just I personally love it. It's probably in my I'd say top 20 greatest movies of all time. It's definitely up there in that list.
Well, and thinking back to some of the cool visuals in that movie, and I'm glad that I got to watch it remastered on Disney Plus because it was obviously cleaned up a bit, but
Yeah.
it still effects wise still holds up fairly well. And I think of the scene when Flynn jumps into the master control program, and you see the silhouette like after Tron throws his disc
Yeah.
in the heart of the program. You see Flynn, shoot up as almost this like Messiah type character. Like, I've saved, the entire grid.
Hmm.
It looked really, really cool. Like, very 80s ish, but in a good way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not cheesy looking.
No, no, not at all. And the cast I thought, was actually pretty good. And you got
Oh
Jeff
yeah.
Bridges, you've got David Warner, Cindy Morgan, you got some
Bruce
good actors.
Boxleitner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
who will also be at Pensacon this upcoming week. In closing, I guess we should go through what all we're going to be doing at Pensacon this weekend. I'll list off the panels that you and I are doing together
Oh
because
yeah.
it's
Let me pull up the list here.
yeah, because we've got quite a few. So I know Saturday you'll be doing the Stephen King film and TV adaptations panel that
Mhm.
will be at 5:15 that I'll be moderating. And then right after that, and I cannot wait to do this panel again, Defending Bad Movies 2 will be at 6:30 p.m. at the Grand Hotel Room B. If you guys don't know what Defending Bad Movies is, search Defending Bad Movies on the Derek Diamond Experience. It's in the archives, and that'll give you an idea of what it's like. We're actually going to have a big panel for bad movies this year, because it's going to be you.
I can't wait.
It's going to be you, Wally, Nathan Simmons, and a friend of the podcast and Nerd Cave Retro, Brandon Rutledge, will be on as well. So it's going to be an absolute blast. But then also we have Sunday morning, also at the Grand Hotel Room B. We're pretty much going to be living in that room the entire weekend.
Yeah.
We'll be doing a Nerd Cave Retro panel at 11 a.m. where we'll be talking about the Mario Brothers series. So a lot of cool stuff going on for Pensacon.
Yeah, and also I'm going to be doing on Saturday at 1:30 in the Grand Hotel Room B. I'll be doing what should be canon in Star Wars, and also the Star Wars sequel trilogy will be Sunday at 4 p.m. to 4:45, and also the Grand B Hotel Room.
Yep, no, it's going to be a lot of fun, and Pensacon is this upcoming weekend, February 28th through March 1st, all over downtown Pensacola. Pretty much the entire downtown area turns into Pensacon. It's a really cool thing, and I cannot wait.
If you haven't gotten your tickets, go get them now.
You ain't got much time left. But in closing, do you want to plug our podcast so people who listen to The Experience can go check it out?
Yeah, go check me and Derek out over at the Nerd Cave at nerdcaveretro.com, and also on Twitter at Nerd Cave Retro, and also on Facebook at facebook.com/nerdcaveretro, where every week we talk about retro game news, history, and every week each of us we do a review of a retro game from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
Fantastic. Well, Jason, thank you for taking the time to talk Tron, and look forward to seeing you this weekend.
Thank you very much. Glad to talk about Tron with somebody else who appreciates it.